morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Inside the private chambers, a small gathering of royal family members stood in tense silence. The air felt heavy with anticipation and unspoken questions. Prince Philip had passed away months ago, but today would change everything the family thought they knew about his final wishes. Catherine stood near the window, her hands clasped together as she watched the royal lawyer arrange documents on the mahogany table. She had been called to this meeting without much explanation, only told that it concerned matters of great importance to the family. Her husband William stood beside her, his face showing concern mixed with curiosity. Across the room, Camilla sat upright in a velvet chair, her expression confident as she expected nothing unusual from this gathering. The lawyer, an elderly man named Mr. Harrison who had served the royal family for decades, cleared his throat to begin. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he held a sealed envelope, bearing Prince Philip's personal seal. Everyone in the room knew that Philip had been a man of tradition and strong opinions. What they did not know was that he had kept one final secret from almost everyone, including his own family members. Mr. Harrison broke the seal carefully and pulled out several pages of handwritten notes along with official legal documents. His eyes scanned the papers briefly before he looked up at the assembled group. The tension in the room grew thicker. Catherine noticed Camilla shift in her seat, smoothing down her dress in a gesture that seemed more nervous than necessary. Something important was about to be revealed, and everyone could sense it. The lawyer began reading in a steady voice that echoed through the chamber. Prince Philip had written this will personally, adding specific instructions about certain family matters that went beyond simple inheritance of property or titles. He had opinions about the future of the monarchy, about who should hold positions of respect and precedence within the family structure. These were not just suggestions, they were his final commands, written with the full weight of his authority as the Duke of Edinburgh. As Mr. Harrison continued reading, Catherine felt her heart begin to race. The document mentioned her name specifically, outlining Philip's wishes for her role within the royal family. He had written about her dedication, her grace under pressure, and her natural ability to connect with the public. Philip had watched Catherine grow into her role over the years, and he had been impressed by her commitment to duty and family. He wanted to ensure that her contributions would be recognized properly. The lawyer then read a section that made Camilla's face turn pale. Philip had written detailed instructions about the order of precedence among the royal women. He believed strongly in maintaining certain traditions and hierarchies based on birth rank and marriage to direct heirs of the throne. His words were clear and left no room for interpretation. Catherine, as the wife of the future king, should take precedence over Camilla in all official royal matters and ceremonies. Camilla's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. She had worked for years to establish her position within the royal family, slowly gaining acceptance and respect from the public and family members alike. She had assumed that as the wife of the current king, she would naturally hold the highest position among the royal women. Philip's will was challenging that assumption directly, and the implications were enormous for the future dynamics of the family. William glanced at Catherine, his eyes showing both surprise and a hint of satisfaction. He had always believed his wife deserved more recognition for her tireless work and dedication. Philip's will was vindicating that belief in the most official way possible. However, William also understood that this revelation would create significant tension within the family. His father Charles and Camilla would not accept this easily. Mr. Harrison continued reading, explaining that Philip had included specific examples of when Catherine should take precedence. During state banquets, she should be seated in positions of higher honor. At official ceremonies and church services, she should process ahead of Camilla. In receiving lines and public appearances, Catherine should be acknowledged as having superior rank. Philip had thought through every detail, ensuring his wishes could not be dismissed or ignored. The room remained silent as the lawyer finished reading the relevant sections. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the responsibility being placed upon her shoulders. She had never sought to create conflict or competition within the family. She simply wanted to serve her country and support her husband. Now she was being thrust into a position that would inevitably cause friction with Camilla, and potentially with Charles himself. Camilla finally spoke. Her voice controlled but with an edge of anger barely contained beneath the surface. She questioned the validity of such instructions, suggesting that times had changed since Philip wrote those words. She argued that as queen consort, she deserved the respect and precedence that came with that title. Her arguments were logical from one perspective, but they ran directly counter to Philip's clearly stated wishes. Mr. Harrison responded calmly, explaining that the will had been written recently, not years ago as Camilla had suggested. Philip had been of sound mind and had consulted with legal experts to ensure his instructions were binding and enforceable. The documents had been properly witnessed and sealed. There was no question about their legitimacy or Philip's intentions when he wrote them. The family would have to accept and implement these wishes. As the meeting concluded, Catherine felt the weight of multiple pairs of eyes upon her. Some looked at her with newfound respect and acknowledgement of her elevated status. Others, particularly Camilla and a few of her supporters among the staff, regarded her with barely concealed resentment. The dynamics within the palace were shifting dramatically, and Catherine knew that the coming days and weeks would test her strength and diplomatic skills in ways she had never experienced before. Philip's hidden will had sparked a palace drama that would reshape the royal family's internal hierarchy and relationships for years to come. News of Philip's will spread through the palace like wildfire, though the family tried desperately to keep the details private. Staff members whispered in corridors, exchanging glances filled with speculation and gossip. Everyone wanted to know exactly what the late Duke had written and how it would affect the daily operations of the royal household. Catherine found herself at the center of attention in ways she had never experienced before, even after years of being in the public eye. The first real test came just 3 days after the will was read. A state dinner was scheduled to welcome foreign dignitaries from several European nations. The seating arrangements had already been planned weeks in advance, with Camilla positioned in the place of highest honor among the royal women. Now those arrangements had to be changed to reflect Philip's instructions, and the task of informing Camilla fell to the royal household staff. Catherine was in her private sitting room when she heard raised voices coming from down the hallway. She recognized Camilla's voice immediately, sharp with anger and frustration. The queen consort was arguing with the master of ceremonies about the new seating chart. Catherine closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Philip's will was revealed. William entered the room moments later, his expression troubled. He had just come from a difficult conversation with his father Charles, who was caught between supporting his wife and honoring his father's final wishes. Charles felt torn between two impossible positions. He loved Camilla and wanted to protect her dignity and position, but he also respected his father's authority and could not simply ignore legally binding instructions laid out in a proper will. The state dinner that evening was tense from the very beginning. Catherine wore a stunning blue gown that seemed to shimmer under the chandeliers, but she felt no joy in her appearance. She was acutely aware of every eye watching her as she took her assigned seat, which was indeed positioned above Camilla's place at the table. The foreign guests noticed the arrangement and exchanged subtle glances, understanding that something significant had shifted in the royal hierarchy. Camilla arrived several minutes later, her face composed into a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She glanced at the seating arrangement and her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Catherine felt a wave of sympathy despite the awkwardness of the situation. She understood that Camilla had worked hard to earn her position, and that having it challenged publicly was deeply humiliating. Yet Catherine also knew she had no choice but to follow Philip's instructions. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed around the table in multiple languages, with translators assisting when needed. Catherine engaged gracefully with the guests on either side of her, discussing topics ranging from climate policy to cultural exchanges between nations. She had learned over the years how to navigate these formal dinners with ease, making everyone feel heard and valued. Her natural warmth and intelligence shone through, reminding everyone why Philip had held her in such high regard. Camilla, sitting several seats away, appeared to struggle more with her composure as the evening progressed. She spoke when addressed but lacked her usual animated energy. Several times Catherine caught Camilla staring at her with an expression that mixed hurt, anger, and something that looked almost like betrayal. Catherine wanted to reach out somehow, to explain that she had not sought this situation, but the formal setting made any personal conversation impossible. After dinner, As guests moved to the reception hall for coffee and entertainment, Catherine found herself briefly alone near one of the large windows overlooking the gardens. She gazed out at the darkness, her mind racing with thoughts about the future. How long could this tension continue? Would Camilla eventually accept Philip's wishes? Or would this create a permanent rift within the family? The questions seemed to have no easy answers. A voice behind her made Catherine turn around quickly. It was Princess Anne, Philip's daughter, who had remained relatively quiet during the earlier meeting when the will was read. Anne had a reputation for being direct and practical, never one to waste time on unnecessary pleasantries. She approached Catherine with a measured expression that was difficult to read. Anne spoke quietly, ensuring no one else could overhear their conversation. She told Catherine that her father had discussed these matters with her before his death. Philip had been very clear about his reasoning, Anne explained. He believed that the monarchy's future depended on maintaining proper protocols and hierarchies. He had watched Catherine carefully over the years and concluded that she possessed the qualities needed to help guide the family through modern challenges while respecting important traditions. Catherine listened carefully as Anne continued. Philip had apparently expressed concerns about changes that might weaken the institution of the monarchy. He valued Camilla's contributions but believed that precedence should be determined by proximity to the direct line of succession. As the wife of the future king, Catherine represented continuity in the monarchy's future in ways that Camilla, despite her title as queen consort, simply could not match in Philip's traditional worldview. Anne's words provided Catherine with context she had been lacking. This was not about personal preferences or favoritism. Philip had been thinking strategically about the monarchy's long-term survival and success. He wanted to ensure that the institution he had served for over 7 decades would continue to command respect and stability. His instructions about precedence were part of that larger vision for protecting the crown's future. As Anne walked away to rejoin other guests, Catherine felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. She understood Philip's reasoning better now, but that understanding did not make the situation any easier to navigate. She would need to find a way to implement these changes while minimizing damage to family relationships. The task seemed almost impossible, but Catherine had faced difficult challenges before and found ways through them. The evening finally ended, with guests departing and family members retreating to their private quarters. Catherine walked beside William through the long corridors, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Neither spoke until they reached their own rooms, where they could finally be alone and honest about their feelings regarding everything that had happened. William pulled Catherine into an embrace, holding her close as she allowed herself to release some of the tension she'd been carrying all evening. He whispered that he was proud of how she had handled herself with such grace under enormous pressure. Catherine felt tears forming but blinked them back. She knew that this was only the beginning. Philip's will had set events in motion that would continue to unfold in unpredictable ways. The palace drama was far from over, and Catherine would need all her strength and wisdom to navigate the complicated path that lay ahead. The days following the state dinner brought no relief from the tension that had settled over the palace like a heavy fog. Catherine tried to maintain her normal schedule of royal duties and charitable work, but everywhere she went, she felt the weight of whispered conversations and speculative glances. The staff had divided into unofficial camps, some supporting the implementation of Philip's wishes while others sympathized with Camilla's difficult position. Catherine was reviewing documents in her office when her private secretary knocked softly before entering. The young woman's face showed concern as she explained that several senior staff members wanted to meet with Catherine to discuss protocols moving forward. They needed clarity on how to handle various situations where questions of precedence might arise. The secretary's tone suggested that these meetings might be uncomfortable, filled with political maneuvering and hidden agendas. That afternoon, Catherine sat through nearly 3 hours of discussions about seemingly endless details. Where should she stand during photograph sessions? Who should enter rooms first during official functions? How should introductions be phrased when both she and Camilla were present? Each question felt like navigating through a minefield where one wrong step could trigger explosions of hurt feelings and family conflict. What troubled Catherine most was the realization that some staff members were using Philip's will as an opportunity to settle old scores or advance their own positions within the palace hierarchy. They pushed for interpretations of Philip's words that went beyond what Catherine believed he had actually intended. She found herself constantly trying to moderate their enthusiasm, seeking ways to honor Philip's wishes without deliberately humiliating Camilla or creating unnecessary drama. Meanwhile, Camilla had retreated somewhat from public view. She continued to fulfill her scheduled obligations, but with noticeably less energy and engagement than usual. Charles appeared increasingly frustrated and torn, spending long hours in meetings with advisors trying to find some way to resolve the situation. The king loved both his wife and honored his father's memory, but those two loyalties seemed impossible to reconcile, given the clear instructions Philip had left behind. A breakthrough of sorts came when Catherine received an unexpected message. Queen Elizabeth's former lady-in-waiting, Lady Susan, requested a private meeting. The elderly woman had served the royal family for decades and was known for her wisdom and discretion. Catherine agreed immediately, hoping that Lady Susan might offer perspective or advice that could help navigate these troubled waters. They met in a small sitting room away from the main palace activities. Lady Susan arrived precisely on time, moving slowly but with dignity despite her advanced age. She settled into a chair and looked at Catherine with eyes that had witnessed decades of royal family dynamics, both public and private. Her first words went straight to the heart of the matter without any pretense or social pleasantries. Lady Susan explained that she had seen similar situations arise before, though perhaps not quite as dramatic as this one. Royal families always struggled with questions of precedence and hierarchy, because these issues touched on fundamental questions of identity, respect, and power. Philip's will had brought these tensions to the surface, but the underlying conflicts had existed long before the document was ever written. The key was finding ways to honor legitimate concerns on all sides while maintaining family unity. Catherine listened carefully as Lady Susan continued. The elderly woman had actually spoken with Philip several times in his final years about his concerns regarding the monarchy's future. He had confided in her about his worries that too many changes too quickly might weaken the institution. Philip had been especially concerned about maintaining clear lines of authority and respect based on traditional principles. However, Lady Susan added significantly, Philip had also valued kindness and family harmony above rigid protocol enforcement. This revelation surprised Catherine. She had assumed from the stern language in Philip's will that he wanted his instructions followed to the letter, regardless of personal feelings. But Lady Susan suggested a more nuanced interpretation. Philip wanted Catherine to have proper recognition and precedence, yes, but he would not have wanted that goal achieved at the cost of destroying family relationships. He had trusted Catherine's judgment to find ways to implement his wishes with wisdom and compassion. Lady Susan offered specific suggestions. Perhaps Catherine could ensure that Philip's instructions were followed during major state occasions and official ceremonies where protocol genuinely mattered, but show flexibility in smaller, less formal situations where strict precedence might not be necessary. She could find ways to acknowledge Camilla's contributions and show respect for her position as queen consort, even while maintaining her own rightful place in the hierarchy. The goal should be honoring Philip's legacy without creating permanent wounds. Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she listened to this advice. She had been so focused on either fully implementing or completely ignoring Philip's instructions that she had not considered there might be a middle path. She could be true to Philip's wishes while also being true to her own values of kindness and family unity. The two goals were not necessarily contradictory if approached with wisdom and care. Over the following week, Catherine began implementing Lady Susan's suggestions. At a major church service attended by numerous dignitaries, she ensured that the seating and processional arrangements followed Philip's instructions precisely. However, at a smaller family gathering the following day, she found an opportunity to quietly defer to Camilla in a way that allowed the queen consort to save face, without contradicting any official protocols. These subtle gestures did not go unnoticed. Camilla seemed slightly less hostile, though still wary and wounded. Charles appeared somewhat relieved that Catherine was not wielding Philip's will like a weapon to dominate every situation. Even some of the staff members who had been pushing for more aggressive implementation of Philip's wishes seemed to recognize that Catherine's measured approach might actually be more effective in the long run, but not everyone was pleased with Catherine's attempts at compromise. She began receiving anonymous notes slipped under her door or left on her desk. Some praised her wisdom and grace. Others accused her of weakness, claiming she was betraying Philip's clear intentions by not enforcing his instructions more forcefully. The notes that bothered her most were the ones suggesting that her kindness toward Camilla would be seen as submission, undermining her own position and authority within the family. William noticed his wife's growing stress and tried to provide support and encouragement. He reminded her that she could not please everyone and that she needed to trust her own judgment about the right path forward. His confidence in her abilities helped strengthen Catherine's resolve. She decided to continue pursuing the balanced approach that Lady Susan had suggested, regardless of criticism from those who wanted more aggressive action or from those who thought she should completely ignore Philip's will. One evening, Catherine was walking through the palace gardens when she unexpectedly encountered Camilla on the same path. Both women froze momentarily, unsure how to proceed. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the carefully maintained flower beds. For a long moment neither spoke, and the silence stretched uncomfortably between them. This was the first time they had been alone together since Philip's will had been revealed, and the tension was palpable in the cooling evening air. Catherine made the first move, offering a gentle smile despite the awkwardness of the unexpected encounter. Camilla hesitated before responding with a slight nod, her guard clearly still raised. They stood on the garden path as evening birds sang their final songs before nightfall. The moment felt suspended in time, heavy with unspoken emotions and the weight of weeks of tension and misunderstanding. Camilla spoke first, her voice carefully controlled but carrying an edge of pain that could not be completely hidden. She stated that she understood Catherine had not created this situation, but that understanding did not make it any less difficult to endure. Years of work building her position and earning respect from both the public and family members felt threatened by Philip's posthumous intervention. She had thought those battles were behind her, only to discover that old prejudices and hierarchical thinking still held power even from beyond the grave. Catherine listened without interrupting, recognizing that Camilla needed to express feelings that had been building for weeks. When the older woman finished speaking, Catherine chose her words carefully. She acknowledged the difficulty of Camilla's position and expressed genuine sympathy for the hurt and frustration Camilla must be feeling. Catherine explained that she had never wanted to create conflict or diminish Camilla's contributions to the family. She was simply trying to honor the wishes of a man who had given his entire life to serving the monarchy. The conversation continued as both women walked slowly through the garden together. They discussed the impossible position they both found themselves in, trapped between duty and personal feelings, between tradition and modern sensibilities. Catherine shared some of what Lady Susan had told her about Philip's true intentions, and his hope that wisdom would guide the implementation of his instructions. Camilla appeared surprised by this information, perhaps having assumed that Philip's will had been designed specifically to hurt or diminish her. As darkness began to settle over the gardens, something shifted between the two women. They had not solved all their problems or erased the tensions created by Philip's will, but they had taken a first tentative step toward understanding each other's perspectives. Camilla admitted that perhaps she had been too focused on her own wounded pride to consider Catherine's difficult position. Catherine acknowledged that she could have communicated better with Camilla from the beginning rather than allowing the situation to develop. Through formal channels and staff intermediaries, they parted ways that evening with a mutual agreement to try to navigate the coming challenges, with more direct communication and less reliance on staff members, who might have their own agendas. Both women understood that the road ahead would still be difficult, but at least now they were facing it with slightly better understanding of each other's positions. The conversation had not solved everything, but it was a beginning. The next major test came sooner than expected. An important royal tour was scheduled to visit 3 Commonwealth nations over 2 weeks. The planning had begun months earlier, long before Philip's will had been revealed. Now the organizers faced difficult questions about who should participate and in what capacity. Should both Catherine and Camilla join the tour? If so, how should their roles be defined to respect both Philip's wishes and the practical realities of representing the monarchy abroad? Charles called a family meeting to discuss the tour arrangements. The atmosphere in the room was noticeably less hostile than previous gatherings, perhaps influenced by Catherine and Camilla's garden conversation. William sat beside Catherine, while Charles positioned himself between defending Camilla's interests and recognizing the need to implement his father's instructions. Anne attended as well, her practical nature helping to keep discussions focused on finding workable solutions, rather than dwelling on grievances. The debate covered multiple aspects of the tour. Some suggested that only Catherine should go, representing the next generation of the monarchy. Others argued that Camilla, as queen consort, had every right to participate and that excluding her would send terrible messages both to the public and to the nations being visited. Several staff members presented detailed protocols and precedents from past tours, trying to find historical examples that might guide current decisions. Catherine surprised everyone by proposing a creative solution. She suggested that both she and Camilla participate in the tour, but that they divide responsibilities based on their different strengths and interests. Catherine would focus on engagements related to children's welfare and mental health, areas where she had extensive experience and genuine passion. Camilla would lead engagements focused on literacy and domestic violence prevention, causes she had championed for many years. They would come together for major state functions where protocol required both to be present, with seating and precedence following Philip's instructions. The proposal had several advantages. It honored Philip's will regarding formal precedence, while also allowing both women to contribute meaningfully to the tour's success. It played to each woman's actual strengths rather than forcing them into competition over identical roles. Perhaps most importantly, it presented an image of a royal family working together cooperatively, rather than being divided by internal conflicts over hierarchy and status. Charles looked relieved by the suggestion, immediately seeing its potential benefits. Anne nodded approval of the practical approach. Camilla appeared thoughtful, weighing the proposal carefully before slowly indicating her willingness to consider it. William squeezed Catherine's hand under the table, proud of his wife's diplomatic creativity in finding a path forward that respected multiple needs and concerns. Over the following days, the tour plans were refined based on Catherine's framework. Staff members worked to develop detailed schedules that would allow both women to shine in their respective areas, while maintaining proper protocol during joint appearances. The arrangement was not perfect and still required compromise from everyone involved, but it represented genuine progress toward functioning as a unified family, despite the complications created by Philip's will. As departure for the tour approached, Catherine found herself feeling cautiously optimistic. The garden conversation with Camilla had opened a door to better communication. The creative solution for the tour showed that the family could work together to find answers to seemingly impossible problems. Philip's will had created significant challenges, but perhaps those challenges were forcing the family to develop stronger, more honest relationships based on direct communication rather than assumptions and intermediaries. The night before departure, Catherine could not sleep. She stood at her bedroom window looking out at the palace grounds, thinking about everything that had happened since Philip's will was revealed. So much had changed in such a short time. She had been thrust into a more prominent position within the family hierarchy, but that elevation had come at the cost of increased tension and complexity in family relationships. William joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They stood together in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke. He told her how proud he was of the way she had handled impossible situations with grace, wisdom, and genuine concern for everyone involved. He had watched her grow more confident in her judgment over the years, learning to trust her instincts even when facing pressure from multiple directions. Catherine leaned back against her husband's chest, drawing strength from his support and love. She realized that Philip's will, despite all the drama and difficulty it had created, might ultimately strengthen her in ways she had not anticipated. She was learning to stand firm in her convictions, while also remaining open to compromise and creative solutions. She was developing the kind of wisdom and balanced judgment that the monarchy would need in future years, when she and William eventually took on even greater responsibilities. The tour itself would be another test, but Catherine felt more prepared to face it than she had felt about earlier challenges. She had learned important lessons about communication, compromise, and staying true to both duty and personal values, even when those things seemed to conflict. Philip's hidden will had sparked palace drama that would be remembered for years to come. but it was also forging Catherine into a stronger, more capable leader who could navigate complex situations with both strength and compassion. The royal tour began with a flight to Australia, the first of 3 Commonwealth nations on the itinerary. Catherine and Camilla traveled on the same aircraft but in separate sections, each surrounded by their own staff members and advisors. The physical distance reflected the emotional distance that still existed, despite their garden conversation weeks earlier. Both women knew that the next 2 weeks would either help heal the rift between them or make it permanently worse. Their first public appearance together came at a state reception in Canberra, hosted by the Australian government. Catherine wore an elegant dress in royal blue, chosen specifically because the color represented both dignity and approachability. Camilla selected a champagne-colored gown that complemented her coloring perfectly. As they prepared to enter the reception hall, photographers positioned themselves to capture every moment of this highly anticipated public appearance. The entrance was choreographed carefully according to Philip's instructions. Catherine entered first, followed moments later by Camilla. The positioning was subtle enough that casual observers might not notice, but those familiar with royal protocol understood immediately what it signified. The arrangement sparked immediate commentary on social media and in news coverage, with some praising the adherence to tradition, while others questioned whether such hierarchies remained relevant in modern times. Inside the reception, both women worked the room with professional skill developed over years of public service. Catherine gravitated toward younger attendees and families, asking questions about their lives and listening with genuine interest to their responses. Camilla engaged with older guests and cultural leaders, discussing books and arts programs with the enthusiasm she was known for. Their different approaches complemented each other, providing varied representation of the royal family's interests and priorities. A challenging moment came when both women found themselves drawn to the same group of guests, who had specifically requested to meet both of them. Catherine and Camilla exchanged glances, neither wanting to create an awkward situation. Catherine made a small gesture indicating that Camilla should join the conversation first. Camilla responded with a grateful nod before engaging with the guests. The brief interaction showed observers that despite protocol questions and palace tensions, the 2 women could still show courtesy and consideration toward each other. The tour moved next to New Zealand, where Catherine and Camilla pursued their separate agendas during daytime hours. Catherine visited children's hospitals and mental health facilities, spending time with young patients and their families. Her warmth and empathy created powerful emotional connections that were captured in photographs, showing her holding hands with sick children or embracing grateful parents. The images reinforced her growing reputation as someone who genuinely cared about the people she met. Camilla focused her energies on literacy programs and domestic violence support centers. She met with women who had escaped abusive situations and rebuilt their lives with help from charitable organizations. Her conversations were direct and honest, drawing on her years of experience advocating for survivors. The visits generated positive coverage highlighting her dedication to causes that often received insufficient attention. Both women were succeeding in their chosen areas, demonstrating that they could both shine without diminishing each other. However, tensions resurfaced during a formal dinner hosted by New Zealand's government. The seating arrangements once again placed Catherine in the position of higher precedence, and this time, Camilla's discomfort was more visible. She smiled for cameras, but her body language conveyed stiffness and unhappiness. Catherine noticed and felt a familiar wave of guilt mixed with frustration. She was following the rules established by Philip, yet every public reinforcement of those rules seemed to wound Camilla again. After dinner, Catherine found a private moment to speak with Camilla away from staff and photographers. She expressed concern about how Camilla was handling the constant reminders of the precedence issue. Camilla's response was honest and raw. She admitted that the public aspects were harder to bear than she had anticipated. Each time protocol placed Catherine ahead of her, it felt like a public diminishment of her years of service and her position as Charles's wife. She understood the reasoning behind Philip's instructions, but understanding did not make the experience any less painful. Catherine listened with genuine sympathy before sharing her own struggles with the situation. She explained how difficult it was to fulfill Philip's wishes, while also trying not to hurt someone she actually respected and whose contributions she valued. She admitted that sometimes she wished Philip had never written those specific instructions, that he had allowed the family to work out precedence questions privately, without the weight of formal legal documents forcing particular arrangements. Their conversation was interrupted by staff members indicating that they were needed for the next scheduled event. The women parted without fully resolving their feelings, but with slightly better understanding of each other's internal struggles. Both recognized that they were trapped in a situation neither had created, forced to navigate public expectations and family dynamics that were often contradictory and always complex. The final leg of the tour took them to Canada, where winter weather created additional logistical challenges. A major outdoor ceremony had to be moved indoors at the last minute, requiring rapid rearrangement of seating and processional plans. In the confusion, an opportunity arose for Catherine to make a meaningful gesture. She suggested to the event organizers that given the informal nature of the relocated ceremony, perhaps strict precedence protocols could be relaxed slightly without violating Philip's intentions. The organizers were uncertain, but willing to follow Catherine's lead. During the ceremony, Catherine ensured that while official photographs and speeches still reflected proper hierarchy, the less formal aspects of the event allowed for more natural interaction between herself and Camilla. At one point, they found themselves standing side by side greeting a long line of Canadian citizens, both women engaging warmly with the crowds. The relaxed atmosphere created some of the tour's most positive images. That evening, Charles hosted a private dinner for just the senior family members traveling on the tour. The mood was surprisingly warm, perhaps influenced by relief that the challenging trip was nearly complete. Over wine and excellent food, conversation ranged across many topics beyond royal duties. Catherine found herself laughing at one of Camilla's stories about an awkward encounter with an over-enthusiastic Australian marsupial. Camilla smiled genuinely when Catherine shared an amusing incident involving her children, misunderstanding something they had seen on the tour. William observed these interactions with quiet satisfaction. He had worried that the tour might increase tensions rather than easing them, but his wife's diplomatic skill and genuine kindness were creating space for healing. Charles also appeared more relaxed than he had been in weeks, no longer caught quite so painfully between loyalty to his wife and respect for his father's wishes. Anne watched everything with her characteristic practical assessment, seeming to approve of how things were developing. The conversation eventually turned to Philip's legacy and what he would have thought about the tour. Charles shared memories of his father's own royal tours, noting how Philip had always focused on connecting with ordinary people, rather than just fulfilling formal obligations. Anne added stories about Philip's sense of humor and his ability to find joy even in difficult circumstances. The reminiscences were bittersweet, reminding everyone of what they had lost while also celebrating what Philip had meant to the family. Catherine listened to these stories with growing understanding of the complex man who had written the will that changed so much. Philip had been devoted to duty and tradition, yes, but he had also valued genuine human connection and finding practical solutions to problems. Perhaps his will was meant not just to establish hierarchy, but to challenge the family to think carefully about what the monarchy needed to survive and thrive. He might have known his instructions would create tension, but perhaps he had trusted that working through that tension would ultimately strengthen the family. As the dinner concluded and everyone prepared to retire for their final night on tour, Camilla surprised Catherine by requesting a brief private word. They stepped out onto a balcony overlooking Canadian winter landscapes lit by streetlights and the glow of the city below. The cold air was bracing, but both women seemed to barely notice as they stood together in the darkness. Camilla spoke quietly, her breath visible in the cold night air. She thanked Catherine for the gesture during the relocated ceremony, acknowledging that Catherine had found ways throughout the tour to honor Philip's instructions, while also showing consideration for Camilla's feelings. The older woman admitted that she had been prepared to hate Catherine, or at least resent her deeply for the entire situation. Instead, she had discovered that Catherine was genuinely trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. Catherine felt emotion tightening her throat as she listened. She told Camilla that she had enormous respect for the work Camilla had done over the years, and the grace she had shown in dealing with intense public scrutiny. Catherine admitted that she had often felt inadequate compared to Camilla's experience and knowledge about royal duties. The precedence issue established by Philip's will did not change Catherine's genuine admiration for what Camilla had accomplished. The two women stood in silence for several moments, processing the significance of what they had just shared with each other. The tension that had defined their relationship for weeks seemed to ease slightly, replaced by something that might eventually grow into mutual respect or even friendship. They were not there yet, but they had taken important steps in that direction. Both understood that healing would take time and continued effort from everyone involved. They returned to the warmth of the building and said goodnight before heading to their separate rooms. Catherine felt lighter than she had in weeks, as though a heavy burden had been partially lifted from her shoulders. The tour had been exhausting and emotionally draining, but it had also moved relationships forward in ways that might not have happened if everyone had remained in the controlled environment of the palace. Sometimes distance and new contexts allowed people to see each other differently. The flight home the next day was long but peaceful. Catherine spent much of it reviewing photographs from the tour and reading through summaries prepared by her staff about public reactions and media coverage. The overall response had been positive, with many commentators noting the professionalism and dedication shown by both royal women. Some articles specifically praised Catherine's diplomatic handling of a delicate situation, while others highlighted Camilla's continued commitment to her chosen causes despite personal difficulties. Upon returning to England, Catherine found herself facing new questions about the future. Philip's will had established precedents clearly, but the tour had demonstrated that rigid protocol enforcement was not always necessary or even beneficial. She began considering how to develop a working relationship with Camilla that honored Philip's instructions during major state occasions while allowing more flexibility in other contexts. The goal was finding sustainable balance that everyone could live with long-term. William strongly supported this approach, believing it represented the best path forward for family harmony and institutional stability. Charles remained somewhat uncertain, but appeared willing to see how things developed. Anne, in her characteristically blunt way, told Catherine that she was handling matters better than most people could have managed and that Philip would likely have approved of her measured approach. The weeks following their return brought a series of smaller engagements and duties that allowed Catherine and Camilla to implement their emerging understanding. At major state events, they followed Philip's protocol strictly, maintaining proper hierarchical arrangements. At smaller, less formal occasions, they found natural ways to work together that did not require constant attention to who stood where or entered rooms first. The flexibility allowed both women to breathe more easily, while still respecting the fundamental principles Philip had established. Public reaction to this balanced approach was generally favorable. Most people seemed to appreciate that the royal family could maintain traditions while also adapting to practical realities. There were critics on both sides, of course. Some traditionalists felt that any deviation from strict protocol enforcement dishonored Philip's memory. Others argued that the entire precedent system was outdated and should be abandoned completely. Catherine learned to accept that she could not satisfy everyone and focused instead on following her own judgment about what best served the monarchy's interests. Several months after Philip's will was first revealed, Catherine attended a private memorial service for the late Duke. The small gathering included only close family members and a few of Philip's oldest friends. The service was intimate and emotional, with various people sharing memories and reflections about Philip's life and legacy. When Catherine's turn came to speak, she chose her words carefully. She talked about Philip's deep commitment to duty and his belief in the importance of the monarchy as an institution serving the nation. She acknowledged that his will had created challenges for the family, but expressed gratitude for the trust he had shown in her by establishing her precedents. Catherine spoke about learning to balance different responsibilities and values, trying to honor Philip's vision while also maintaining family relationships and adapting to changing times. Her words were sincere and thoughtful, moving several people in attendance to tears. After the service, Camilla approached Catherine and embraced her briefly. No words were exchanged, but the gesture conveyed acceptance and perhaps the beginning of genuine friendship. Charles observed the interaction with visible relief, finally seeing hope that his family might find peace after months of tension. William stood beside Catherine, his hand gently resting on her back in a gesture of support and solidarity. In the months and years that followed, Catherine continued to navigate her elevated position within the royal hierarchy, with the same careful balance she had developed during that challenging period. She ensured that Philip's instructions were honored during important occasions, while also building a working relationship with Camilla, based on mutual respect and practical cooperation. The two women would never be best friends, but they developed a professional partnership that served the monarchy well. Catherine often reflected on everything she had learned during those difficult months after Philip's will was revealed. The experience had tested her in ways she had never anticipated, forcing her to develop new skills in diplomacy, conflict resolution, and strategic thinking. She had learned that honoring someone's wishes did not always mean rigid enforcement, without consideration of context or consequences. She had discovered that strength could be shown through flexibility as well as firmness. The palace drama sparked by Philip's hidden will gradually faded from daily conversation, as other issues and events demanded attention, but the underlying changes it created remained significant. Catherine's position within the family hierarchy had been formally established and was now generally accepted by everyone involved. More importantly, the process of working through the conflicts had strengthened certain relationships and taught valuable lessons about communication and compromise. Years later, when Catherine's children asked her about their great-grandfather Philip, she told them stories about his dedication to duty, his sharp wit, and his deep love for the monarchy he had served so faithfully. She also told them about the complicated gift he had left her through his will, instructions that had challenged her to grow into a stronger, wiser person capable of balancing competing values and responsibilities. She explained to her children that leadership sometimes meant making difficult decisions and standing firm in important principles. But it also meant knowing when to show flexibility and compassion, when to prioritize relationships over rigid rules. Philip's will had taught her both lessons, perhaps more effectively than any amount of formal training could have done. Catherine never forgot the emotional weight of those months navigating palace drama while trying to honor both Philip's legacy and her own values. The experience shaped her approach to royal duties for the rest of her life, informing countless decisions about how to serve the monarchy while remaining true to herself. Philip's hidden will had sparked crisis and conflict, but it had ultimately helped forge Catherine into the kind of leader the royal family needed for its future. As she looked back on everything that had happened, Catherine felt deep gratitude for the trust Philip had placed in her. Even though that trust had come with such heavy responsibilities, she had not asked for the precedence he established or the drama it created, but she had risen to meet the challenge with grace and wisdom. In doing so, she had honored Philip's memory in the truest way possible, not just by following his instructions but by embodying the values of duty, service, and thoughtful leadership that he had represented throughout his remarkable life.